Well, welcome to the Straight Path Solutions kind of monthly webinar we're doing on a different topic. And if you've been watching us so far, we've been choosing kind of a theme each month to talk about. So last month, we were talking about upgrades and migrations. This month, we're talking about HADR. Next month, actually, Jeff, you want to talk about what we're talking about next month? I'll put you on the spot. You're on mute.
Got to unmute myself first. We're talking about our use of community tools.
Yep. What's your favorite, by the way? We'll just preview yours. It's hard
I
to
really like the different ways that you can use Atom Mechanics Who is Active.
Cool. Yeah, we use that a lot. So we'll talk about that. Then I believe in February, we're talking about indexing. We have a bunch of topics. So just follow the blog and you'll see what we're talking about. But today is all about HADR. And we're not doing this with slideshows. We're doing this with a panel discussion. So I have a few panelists here. I guess I'm going to have to start with a person with a Christmas sweater on. So David Cease, he is on our support team. He's one of our DBAs, junior DBAs. And he actually is really, really strong in info security and data security. So we lean on him a lot there. And he also has great fashion taste, obviously. Sandra Delaney is here, and she is, I guess, probably nobody in the call will dispute she is our AG guru. So when anybody has a question with AG, Windows clustering, failover clustering in SQL, settings, timeouts, weirdness, we always hope that Sandra is around. We're all really good at it, but Sandra is Mike does the not it thing. Absolutely. Mike Clark, you can wave to everybody. They can tell who you are anyway. Mike is on our leadership team. He's one of our senior DBAs, and Mike has been an enterprise DBA most of his career, so he's really strong in the HADR. A lot of your clients that you're a lead DBA for are in availability groups. Tara Kaiser is here. I know why she had an HADR talk. Isn't she just your typecast as performance and parameter sniffing? But you're actually really good with this stuff.
Only typecast here, though.
That's right.
Lots and lots of background in HADR.
Yeah, tons of it. So she does a lot with availability groups, really good with log shipping. And if I have a client that calls up and says, "Hey, can you support mirroring?" I do nod it and say, "Hey, Tara, let's talk to this client." So she and mirroring is still there. It's deprecated, but it's still there. Jeff Iannucci is one of I say newest, but you've been here a while now, but he is our newest senior DBA, and he's an all-around great DBA. Actually, talk about your book, because your book is getting some pretty cool traction. So this has nothing to do with HADR, but I'd love to let people know about your book.
Turning into a promo here.
That's right.
No, I'm in the middle of writing the book, Learn SQL in a Month of Lunches. That's the language SQL, not SQL Server. Which you can purchase an advanced copy now and start reading the first 6 chapters at Manning Publications.
So pretty cool. And Jeff knows a lot about HADR as well. So really, we just want to have a panel discussion and just sort of chat back and forth a little bit about HADR, and then mostly answer questions as well. And the format here is pretty simple. This is being recorded. The HADR discussion is recorded. There are blog posts on our blog this month. If you go to straightpathsql.com about HADR, I think David's post is up and Jeff's post is up. Mine will come up next week. Mike Lynn has a post as well about SQL Server Standard and SIOS Data Keeper, which is what we use a lot to help keep people on standard. Actually, Jeff had a great post last month about staying on SQL Server Standard when it comes to upgrades and migration. So those kind of tie into each other, I think. But yeah, when we're done with this part, we will stop the recording, do an Ask Us Anything if somebody has random SQL Server questions about HADR or really anything, and we'll do our best to answer. And we won't record that to protect the guilty if you're blaming developers or SAN admins for problems. So, basically, I'll just talk about a few things up front. Actually, I have a. Let me share this link. I have to find it on YouTube again because I just closed my browser. But I have a post, past presentation I did a couple of years ago about an intro to HADR, and that's up on the web someplace. I'll find it eventually here and share it when I'm done talking and somebody else was talking. But it's a great intro to what is high availability, what is disaster recovery, and what things should you be thinking of. But I want to talk about a few of the things here and then kind of get into just stories, because sometimes the Gestalt method of talking through stories and experience, you actually learn a lot about what to do, and we'll teach you some things what not to do as well, I think. So a few definitions that will help us. One is kind of HANDR. Anybody want to give a real succinct answer on what the difference between the two are? I mean, obviously it's high availability and disaster recovery, but anybody want to, I have a crude way of talking about it in my presentations. Well, I don't use the crude words, but anybody have a good, if not, I'll just say it.
I don't know about the crude way, but the biggest thing is data loss. HA is supposed to be no data loss, and DR is going to have some level of data loss.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my way is kind of, I say HA is sort of for the oh no situations as well. So HA is really for to Tara's point, there's no data loss, but typically when I'm developing an HADR solution, HA is what we want to allow to have a sort of patching. You want to be able to patch on a passive and fail over. You want to be able to support a local failure. So something inside the data center goes bad. Where DR, so sort of HA is for the oh no moments, and DR is for the, the oh bleep moments, where you lose a site, you lose a SAN, you lose something core, and you have to fail over to a different site. Some clients can have just DR, some can have just HA, some have both. So that's important. And there are some boring terms to talk about too, like RPO and RTO, recovery point objective and recovery time objective. So recovery point is really not just, we'll talk about low availability in a second, but RPO and RTO are not just about high availability. It's really how much data can you lose? That's recovery point objective. So to what point can you recover? And recovery time objective is how long are you down for? And there are many different ways to meet HADR requirements. One thing that we have to do as DBAs is we cannot just sort of decide in a vacuum what HADR solution we're doing. We have to talk to the business. So we have to be able to talk to the people. And hey, Jeff, if we ask a customer sort of management team, not the non-technical management team, how much data can you lose and how long can you be down for? What's the answer we're going to get?
What do you think? I mean, that's literally the answer. What do you think?
Yeah, or none, right?
Yeah, or none, right? Yeah.
And is that possible, Tara? You're drinking.
Sorry, there's a production issue at one of our clients that I was dealing with.
Oh, nice. Oh, you're really drinking then. No,
what was the question?
The question is if we ask a client or a client's sort of business leadership team, what's your RPO and RTO? The answer is obviously 0 and 0.
Yeah.
Is that doable?
It's doable with enough money.
Exactly.
Lots of zeros at the end there.
Yep.
Clients think that their systems are highly available, or that they think that they're probably hitting near 100%. But when you look at how they have jobs set up, how their hardware set up, how their HADR technologies are set up, in reality, they probably have more like 4 hours or more of RPO for DR. Because of things like index maintenance, index rebuilds. So log shipping or async AGs will get very, very latent when you hit a large index rebuild, and the business just isn't aware of that.
Absolutely. Yep. No, that's perfect. And it's very true. So you can do any RPO and RTO we want. It's just it's not only the more cost, but it's just harder to manage. It's harder to set up, harder to manage. That it's more tenuous. So we have to be, the DBAs we're the geeks at the company who are unafraid of talking to people. We have to be able to kind of communicate and sort of say what the client's asking for or what your leadership's asking for, and then talk about the pricing and how you can do it. So more nines mean more zeros, is a great way of thinking of that. SLA, that's just service level agreement. That's just the sort of the contract, for lack of a better word, that we use to sort of enforce the RPO and RTO. And some SLAs have teeth, some SLAs don't have teeth. It depends on who you are. I want to talk a little bit about what you might call low availability first, because high availability is really important. But if we can't do the basics first, we're kind of in trouble. So David, I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of backup and recovery, because if you're here and you're not doing what we might call a proper backup, I wouldn't worry about HA and DR yet. I would just worry about your generic availability. Do you do a lot of health checks for clients, David? You're in our support organization, so you see a lot of backup failures, and you also care about security, and ransomware is a real threat. So talk us through kind of backing up and recovery. When is a backup good, and kind of how does that work?
Sure. So we use an OLA, an adapted OLA framework here for all of our clients, which ensures up to 15 minutes of point in time recovery for day to day, and even having high availability. If something happens, somebody accidentally truncates a table because they thought they're in their dev environment, then we have up to 15 minutes of data loss maximum using that. And we do that through, full backups weekly, diff backups daily, and log backups every 15 minutes for the most critical databases. The way we verify that, there's built-in verification to make sure the backup isn't corrupt through OLA procedures. And then we also recommend a few other options. A lot of clients have their backup sent to a network share, which simplifies management of the space in the backups in that sense. We also recommend an off-site backup, maybe copying the backups from that share to an Azure or S3 bucket, so that whenever ransomware hits, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, the first thing they look for are those backup files, and then they'll encrypt them or delete them. And if you're lucky, they'll be able to unencrypt them if you did pay. So the first step is sort of to air gap those backups so that in a disaster you can get your data back. And then let me just check my note real quick. Yeah, so the offline, the offsite backups, and then the second part of the process we recommend is always doing restore testing. Yeah. So how long does it take, should a disaster occur, to get those backups from our cloud buckets, wherever they are, and get production back up and running, so that we can say this process is good enough for what we have, like 5 hours is enough time and we're okay with that, or it's not enough, and how do we fix it? Like what other stop gaps do we need? Do we need different jump boxes? Do we need static storage somewhere else? So those are the questions you can answer by doing backups regularly, restore testing, having ransomware protected backups by having them offsite and not accessible on your network, etc.
Sure. I love that. And I mean, I think everybody in this panel has unfortunately either been a part of or been called into a situation where a client wasn't pining for HADR, they were just pining for good backups. I mean, we've all done it, right? We've all been there, and that's not a fun conversation. And with ransomware spreading, we're seeing it more and more. So there are people who will watch this video or hear that may not have good backups, and it's such an easy thing to do. And the framework David was talking about was the old Hallinger and maintenance solution, which is what we prefer. And I'm assuming we will talk about that in next month's webinar and blog post about our favorite community tools. Maybe somebody can just post a link to OLA's site there, just for folks who are following along at home. But yeah, that's great. Thanks, David. And the really important thing there is when it comes to backups, the only reason we do backups is for restores. So I don't like to think of backups. I like to think of restores, and that changes your kind of your outlook on how you approach it. There are many ways to accomplish or achieve high availability disaster recovery. There's log shipping, which has been around for a long time, and that's really good for DR. Not really HA, obviously, because it doesn't automatically fail over. It doesn't sort of detect a problem. It's not a quick failover. You don't change your connections. It's not seamless to users, but it's great for DR. It's great for migrations too, as we talked about last month. Failover cluster instances, that is great for HA. And with Sios Data Keeper, like Mike Lynn blogged about last week, you can do DR with that, because you can achieve shared storage across the country with storage replication. Availability groups, that is sort of what Microsoft morphed mirroring into, if you will. Availability groups give you the ability to have HA and DR, and you can bring multiple pairs in. You can read off your secondaries. SQL Server 2022 gave us a lot of new features there. That's an important HA technology, and DR. But a lot of people think that, oh, AGs are there. I've actually we had a conversation with a customer maybe a month ago, and they said, I thought failover clusters were deprecated. No, they're not deprecated. AGs are not the end all be all. They're great when you need them. And we'll talk about the difference in a little bit here. Then you can do it through VMware or Hyper-V. There's different HA technologies behind the scenes. Problem with those is they don't protect your C drive. So if you have a hardware failure with VMware HA, this is the extent of what we'll talk about VMware HA, unless you have a question in the chat. But if you have a hardware failure with VMware HA, so a host dies, congratulations, you're good, because your VM is going to fail over. If your operating system goes corrupt because a bad Microsoft patch came out, which, knock on ball guy's head, it does happen, and we've seen it more and more lately as the technologies increased and the uses and the use cases for testing increase, we're seeing maybe what feels like more oopses and patches. And if you corrupt your operating system, VMware HA is just going to take your corrupt operating system and move it over to the node. Now there are ways like Zerto and tools to do snapshots and potentially lose 15 minutes of data. But VMware HA will not protect you from what you might call C drive protection failure or operating system failure. And then if you're in platform as a service offerings up in Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, there are myriad technologies which are based on sort of the ones we're talking about here that do some of that for you. I'll just kind of go down the list of some of the team members and talk about certain technologies. So Sandra, when it comes to availability groups, just give us kind of a brief overview of them and pros and cons, and maybe your favorite thing about them and your least favorite thing about them, if you have a least favorite.
Well, they are good for HADR, but if you have clients that insist on having two nodes where one is on one site and one is in a completely different site, the bad part about that is if you put it to synchronous, you'll have latency. If you put it to async, then you have issues with, failover. You can't failover if you have a node that's an asynchronous. You can't. You have to force it because you have to force with data loss. If they are in sync and they're two separate locations, you can have something called where within the cluster, it sees it as, what is that word I'm thinking of? Where they both think that they're both primary.
Split brain.
Split brain.
You have a split brain right now. Yeah.
Yes, I do have a split brain.
Yeah.
So, and that's bad because then you're going to have to force one to be primary and hoping that it can cause problems. So that can be an issue. Ideally, you like to have two nodes that are in the same location that are synchronous. And then if you're going to have DR, move that somewhere else as async. And then when you do have them synchronous, set them to automatic so that they can fail over but like you want them to. However, your application has to be AG aware. And the client needs to understand that always on is not always on. When you fail over, you get disconnects and it reconnects. And if your application is AG aware, it's automatic. I have a client where it's not AG aware and they have to recycle the application for the connections to connect in. So you have to kind of talk to your clients about all of those situations and that they need to be aware. And then I also have had clients where it has to be on a specific node. So when you're doing patching or whatever that they do, you have to make sure that you're failing over to the node that they want it. So there's pros and cons to it.
Absolutely. It is a great technology where it makes sense. I like it. It's great for migrations. It's great to add a node in quickly and easily. So depending on your environment, Tara has a few clients that are in her sort of list of clients that she is the lead DBA for that are, we had one yesterday with a 27 terabyte database. Those don't come in and out of a third node in the AG pretty easy. Jeff, you want to talk about failover clusters a little bit?
Sure. They're not as glamorous as availability groups. Everybody loves availability groups because you get the readable secondary and you get the synchronous or the asynchronous. You get a lot more options than you do with a failover cluster. Out of the box, your failover cluster instance has that shared storage, which can become a single point of failure if you don't have it configured. Just because it's shared storage. But one of the big advantages of failover cluster instances is with standard edition. And I think, as you alluded to earlier, our colleague Mike Lynn wrote a pretty good blog post that's out there right now about using SIOS, which instead of sharing the storage, replicates the storage across to two different servers, which don't necessarily have to be in the same data center. And you get that high availability aspect while still being able to use a failover cluster instance. The benefits that he alluded to in that blog post, specifically for standard edition, you can use it's standard edition in availability groups is, well, it's basic availability groups, right? You get one database per availability group. You don't get readable secondaries unless you're doing snapshots. So there are limitations for standard edition, but with a failover cluster instance, really the main limitation is just you get two nodes, which most people use for most failover cluster instances anyway.
Yep, absolutely. And again, with DataKeeper, you can do DR. So if you want to have DR only, you can do that. Because we've had some clients who don't really want HA. They just don't want to lose data. They want to say, hey, listen, if something bad happens, we want to know that we have data someplace else and we can get it online quickly. We don't care if it's not as performant. We don't care if it's far away. So that's a great candidate for a DR. We can be down for an hour or two. We just don't want to lose data, and we want to be able to survive a site failure. Well, that's DR. So yeah, and we really enjoy putting people into SQL Server Standard when they're coming from enterprise. I tell my clients all the time, I would much rather you spend money on consulting than on SQL Server licensing if we can help you with that. And since we're going like in order of glamour here, I didn't mean to, but availability groups, if you want to call the most glamorous, and failover cluster is a little bit less glamorous. We'll talk to Tara about log shipping, which is kind of the least glamorous DR and HA technology out there, but I actually like it a lot.
And I'm probably the worst one to talk about it because I only have bad things to say about log shipping. So
well, it's good. It's good to talk about the cons. So yeah, it's good. Well, I'm going to force you to say something good about, like in debate school, where you have to take the other side. So
yeah, I mean, certainly it's a rock solid technology. It's been around since SQL 2000 days. Back before 2000, we had to roll our own log shipping. I'm pretty sure 2000 was the first log shipping version. I've been using it since SQL 2000. One of the companies I worked for in the past, we did disaster recovery failovers, on purpose to our disaster recovery site twice a year. And we ran production out of there for 2 to 3 weeks at a time to prove that the hardware and the whole setup was good. And back then we just had log shipping, and the amount of work that you have to do to get log shipping set up, it's the same for AGs and database mirroring because you have to do, restores and all that. But the steps required to do that failover, it's not as glamorous as FCI failover and AG failover, database mirroring failover. There's additional work there. It can be scripted, it can be fast. And one of the issues that we had is that some of these systems that we were failing over had a lot of transactions. A lot of transactions means bigger transaction log backups, which means you have to restore those, copy those over and restore them. Same thing can happen with AGs and database mirroring, but at least those are constantly flowing. Whereas with log shipping, it's a backup and a restore event that has to occur. So there's more latency there. So we had scripts that we would run prior to the actual failover to get those caught up as much as possible, and then do those failovers. And, testing would occur and bring the sites online. And then you got to set it up in the other direction. And that is exhausting for the amount of servers we had to do. Yeah. It is a great technology, especially for migrations. It's a great technology for disaster recovery. Some people like to use it for reporting. I don't like it for reporting because of the latency involved, but if you're okay with that latency, then that's great. It is a good technology to do reporting on. If you're okay with like 8 hours of latency where you skip those restores for or during business hours,
out and restore it every time.
Well, you can't do that to reports. I mean, the users don't like that, so you have to build in a into the job schedule that you're not going to do restores during the day, and you'll catch up at night. But that just increases your RTO. Doesn't really increase your RPO because the files are still being copied, but the restores aren't happening. So your RTO increases. So I like log shipping, but I don't like it as far as having to use it as compared to AG's database mirroring or FCI. Well, FCIs don't apply for disaster recovery. Yeah, not usually, at least.
Yep. Yeah, and a great SQL Server Standard thing to do if you need HA and DR is you do 2 nodes in a failover cluster instance, SQL Server Standard, and then you log shipping someplace else for DR, and that's it's really good for that. When you start talking about reporting, I'm with you, Tara. I don't like that. I start cringing. Like It's just back up your darn database once a night and don't use log.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's a different solution that can be used
Yeah,
there.
yeah. And don't do it. There's this, yeah. So those are the main technology. I'm not missing any. Replication is kind of one. I talk about my presentation sometimes. It's Microsoft still lists replication as a HA solution, DR solution. I don't know. I would much rather see you use log shipping than replication.
If you've attended any office hours for Bredos are Unlimited and that topic comes up,
Yeah.
you will always hear me saying, wow, that's a bad idea.
That's a terrible idea. Yeah.
Replication
Yeah.
is not a HADR solution.
Yeah. Replication is really good for reporting. Transactional replication is good for reporting. And if your application really needs merge replication, God bless you and good luck. We'll help you. We have the replication people here, but replication is wonderful for reporting, I think, and for getting some data out to other customers, et cetera. So let's talk about, I like horror stories. So I'm curious if anybody here has made a mistake relating to HADR that caused downtime. And I'll go first. I've done this, and some of our clients have done this. And I have a blog post about it. And I feel really bad when our clients do this because I've been there, done that. One day, many moons ago, I was working in a Windows 2003, SQL 2000, 2005 failover cluster instance. And I was a newish DBA. I had just learned about clustering. We had a lot of storage that was being held up in the Dell compellent SAN, and the storage admin, because back then we had storage admins, used to give me a hard time and call me a disk sponge because I was a DBA, and we made him give us all the spindles and our own dedicated RAID groups and meta LUNs, and he hated us for that. But I gave him a terabyte of storage back, which back then was a big deal. And I was all proud, and I wanted to make Mike, the storage admin, happy. So I made sure it was done. I looked away, said, yep, this disk is completely empty, not a single database file on it. I'm done with it. So I went in and I offlined the disk. And anybody in this panel know what happened when I did that? Sandra, what did I do?
Sorry, I was working a client.
Oh, that's fine. See, we're so busy. Always be billing. Yeah, so I remove a disk and I took the data off at first, but something bad happened in the cluster. Anybody know what happened? Nobody? It failed over, then it failed back, then it failed over, then it stopped because it hit the magic 3 times. What did I forget to do?
And you're an AG or FCI?
Fail over cluster instance.
Oh, you didn't remove it out of the cluster.
As a dependency. Yeah.
Right.
I did not go into the dependencies and tell SQL Server not to use this drive. So I went from being a hero to the storage admin to being a 0 with the CIO. And that's a, if you know anything about office politics, that's the wrong way to go. She came running down there because it was an online nursing app that 24/7 our insurance companies and nurses were doing healthcare coaching for clients. So it was not a good day. It was not a fine moment. Anybody else make any big mistakes? Or Sandra, that was a really proud hand raise.
Well, it wasn't really my mistake. So we had an environment where they were vMotioning because they were moving the VMs from one node to another where it was faster disks because it couldn't keep up. So they turned off one node and was copying it over, which it could talk to the witness and it could talk to one of the nodes. So it was happy. Then they decided to vMotion the second one, the witness, which then brought it down to one node. So they brought the whole sucker down and they couldn't turn on the other node because it was still vMotioning. So we actually had a DR server that I was able to throw back in to get the nodes up while it was vMotioning because they were huge VMs. So it wasn't really technically my fault, but I had to fix it. So I learned that time to make sure you always have 2 that they can talk, because once it brings it back down to 1, unless you're going to force quorum, you're in a bad spot. And
Absolutely.
then I heard that was one of my old jobs, but it wasn't my issue. I just heard about it later where the SAN guys, they had 2 nodes Well, they had two nodes and they were sharing a LUN on the SAN. That LUN went down, which brought both of them down.
Yep.
So anytime I talk to people about AGs, I'm like, do not share LUNs if you have two nodes. They have to be separate, because if one goes down and you're sharing it, you're done.
Yeah.
You are done. So I make sure I make a point to say that when I talk to people about that. Because
Yeah, and that's one of the big benefits of an AG, right? Is you can have everything separate. And
right, but if you're
a
sharing,
LUN,
you're sharing a LUN. Yeah, it is separate, but you're not separate.
Yep.
And a lot of times we don't know what they do on the back end. So I always bring that up and say, you need to figure this out, because I can't see what you have on the back end, but I'm telling you, if you have that and that goes down, you're done.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. And that's our, because failover clusters require shared storage, and with Silas Data Keeper, you can replicate shared storage. So that's good. But if you're on a SAN, anybody know what like a famous refrain SAN salespeople say, but also say, I mean, SANs can never, anybody starts with an F, fail. Have you guys heard that before? Oh, SANs can't fail. There's all these redundancies built in, but yeah, they do fail. So AGs are great for that. Anybody else have any horror stories that things you've done, or we can expand it. We can talk about things that we've seen our customers do, or past coworkers, if you want. We won't name our customers who do this.
I'll talk about one quick thing, and this isn't really nearly as disastrous as what you've talked about. But when setting up an AG, if you choose auto seeding, that's great with smaller databases. But at one point, I remember adding a 5 terabyte database to an availability group, and then the estimated auto seeding completion date was somewhere like months in the future.
Yep.
So that was going to be a while. If you're going to go that route, there is a trace flag. I think it's 9567. That's really handy to enable compression for that, which can auto seed a heck of a lot faster.
Yeah.
For your databases in an availability group. Just a hip tip if you ever add one of those large terabyte or more databases.
I love that, a hip tip. Today I learned that phrase, a hip tip. A good thing there too, like we're big fans of patching and being up to date. Over the years, auto seeding has gotten better in various CUs. So if you're still running, say, SQL Server 2017 RTM released to manufacturer, you are not going to have the same auto seeding experience as someone on the latest CU of 2017 or 2019 or 2022. So AGs especially are a good reason to sort of stay ahead of the curve with upgrades. Don't, go back and watch last month's webinar and videos, and don't get behind the curve and fall back, 12 versions behind because it's comfortable, because you will have a different experience with AGs. And when you call Microsoft, if you're a couple of versions back, their answer is, well, I'm sorry about that. Hope things work out for you, more or less, even if it's under support, technically speaking.
On the auto seeding topic, one of our clients recently had an issue with it. This cluster was set up at least a year ago. Auto seeding was used for, to set up the group, and all the smaller databases got synced, and then we manually did the bigger databases. But the auto seeding config was still in place up until about 2 to 3 weeks ago. Auto seeding was now clogging up the error log with repeated messages that there was nothing to auto seed. And when I say clogging it up, I mean many gigabytes per day of error log junk from auto seeding, and just had to turn the auto seeding config change off. And that prevents you from auto seeding new databases. But I'm not sure why it was so verbose in 2019, and it wasn't a problem until this in November, and it had been like this for a while. But you want your error logs to be clean, and 2019 can be very verbose about a lot of things, and one of them is auto seeding, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed that too. You can tell when a client just recently upgraded because it's like, what is going on in the error log? It was like a blip. It was in 2019, and I think they even got rid of it, maybe in some CUs of it. But it was
this is on the latest CU.
Okay. Oh yeah, maybe
and
not.
Yeah, this client has a lot of databases. So I checked the DMV where the auto seeding, I think it's logging is, and you could see it just going through 70 databases.
Sure.
Trying to see if anyone needs to be auto seed. It's like, no, those have been synced for a year. We
Nice.
don't need it here.
Nice. as happens with consulting, Sandra had to jump off to help with a client emergency. So that happens. You might see somebody else disappear sometimes on future webinars here. It is what it is.
Have we talked about yesterday's client issue?
Yeah, let's talk about that. You want to talk about that? So that I was going to say, let's talk about kind of issues we've seen and help troubleshoot that you should be aware of.
I just wasn't sure if we talked about it since I also was working on projects.
Yeah, I get it. I'm the only one that doesn't know any orchestrate path. That's the job of a CEO. Nothing.
Yes. So I'm the on-call DBA, and got a call from our answering service that we had a client that had a hardware outage, and so Mike and I joined the call. And got logged in and pulled up their AG config as they were asking about failing over to the other server, and in a proper HA environment, either FCI, AGs, database mirroring, whatever your HA technology is, that failover would have already occurred. So, automatically. And so I knew to check the AG config. This is an AG and they're asking for a manual failover to occur. And notice that not only was it set to manual failover for the other two secondaries in this group, but they were both set to asynchronous. So now they have a hardware failure. The server is down hard in some kind of hardware loop. Later learned that they need to replace the RAID controller. And they'd already been down for an hour when they reached out to us for help. And so they were in a bit of a panic. And you can certainly do a failover to it, but the command to do that, literally says in the command, force failover data loss. So I copied that command in, sharing my screen, and I showed them, this is the risk here. And we don't know how much data loss there is going to be. That the one secondary that we're going to fail over to is in the same data center. I think they said it was in the same, I don't even know if it was the same rack, but it was nearby the server that was down. So data loss should be minimal, but we can't quantify that. We can assume that it would be less than 5 minutes because we have monitoring tools that'll tell us if it's more than 5 minutes, unless we've changed that default threshold. In likelihood, it'd probably be a couple of seconds. That's generally what you'll see if you look at the AG latency DMVs for that. But, it could be small, it could be larger, we can't quantify that. That's something that you have to take a look at. Hopefully you have some kind of table that if your system's busy enough, you'd be able to see the gap from the last, say, insert of some busy table to after the failover occurred and your system's back up and running. So data loss occurs there, maybe not, if your system's not busy, of course, data loss is not going to occur, but this is sound like this is a busy system and they need to get their system up and running. So eventually we did do that forced failover data loss, and their hardware is still not online. So, waiting for the client to tell us about the hardware issue being resolved, and then we could do get it back in sync, get that node back in sync.
Absolutely.
So I think that the client thought that they had high availability in place.
Yeah.
They had a past employee who set this up and told us that this is how the config should be. That employee no longer exists. And I don't think that the people on the call were aware that they really did not have HA in place for this. And so it's not a good situation to think that you have HA and you don't really because of a config issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we were told at the time not to touch it,
Yeah, they said that we don't want
not on
it.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had some, and what it was basically just, somebody said that this probably doesn't work in the application, and nobody, and the client didn't check it. So that basically was like, hey, this doesn't work in failover. They had some bug. So they said, let's never fail over automatically because something doesn't work. And turns out it was actually all dealable things. So would have made a difference. A lot of things in IT, I'm not going to tell the story about the roast pan, but I'll blog about it sometime. But a lot of things happen because it's always been that way. And it's not actually what happens. So another take on what happened with that client yesterday, Tara, was we had a client, I don't know, a couple of months ago or a month ago, and they basically had a situation where they had 3-node AG, 2 nodes in the same data center, 1 node across the country that was supposed to be a DR node, and the HA nodes stay in synchronous mode, which is good. So they had a failover, no problem. But they had a new DBA that was helping, and the DBA said, "Oh, that node's not asynchronous. We should make it say synchronous because in an availability group, and this is fine. This is why you partner with people who do this. When you look at an AG, the database list, if a database is in a synchronous commit mode and everything's working fine, the database says synchronized, ZED. In an asynchronous AG or an AG that's unhealthy, either way, it always says synchronizing. And if you're a person who likes everything looking the same, synchronizing, oh no, there's a problem. Well, one sure way to make all the databases synchronized is to take that third node across the country with a low latency connection and put it into synchronous mode. I guarantee you your AG will become synchronized in that node. But to do that, you're going to introduce a lot of weights called HADR sync commit weights. And everything you do now on the primary will be slow, waiting for it to go all the way across the country, commit there, and then have a notification come all the way back and say, hey, you're committed. So they had a bunch of performance problems. And we just said, hey, let's go back to asynchronous since that's DR and you already have HA. And poof, all the performance problems went away. So, it's the same problem on two different sides of the spectrum. And really, we're a consulting company. So I am fully biased in saying this, and I fully understand that. If you are doing a new HADR implementation, you've never had HADR, or you're doing a migration or an upgrade, and you might get to do one upgrade every 10 years at your company, or every 5 years, hopefully, working with a consulting company, whether it's ours or any of the other great ones out there in the SQL family, working with a consulting company who's done this and do this all the time. I jokingly mocked Farmers Insurance's motto here in America. It's we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. So working with a consulting partner for just 20 or 40 hours, you're going to get all of that knowledge and not make that kind of mistake in your setup. And we get clients all the time that come in with health checks saying, we have an AG and everything's slow. And that HA and DR description I just gave you, that's their current status. Or the one Tara gave you, that's their current status. And they're not able to have a failover.
So I'll admit to a production issue that I caused, which is related to what you're discussing. Sure. So that company that I worked for a lot of years and did those failovers to DR twice a year. One of the systems, I was fully scripted. I mean, I don't remember the details of it, but after the failover, a few days later, the customer support people were saying we're getting a lot of calls, the performance is bad. And, I didn't find any issues. At the time, this was probably 10, 15 years ago. And weight stats analysis is what I do these days. And I have been doing for a lot of years. But back then, I did not know to look at the weight stats. And had I looked, I would have seen HADR sync commit weights. One of the, this wouldn't have been AG, this would have been database mirroring. One of the secondary partner in the database mirroring pair was set to synchronous commit, and I left it that way. It should have been async after the testing was done. Synchronous to allow the failover to occur, sure. And then switch it to async. And I missed that step to switch it to async mode. That we were going to stay in. This was from San Diego to Las Vegas. Stay in Las Vegas as a disaster recovery server. And I think the issue got reported to me on a Monday, and it wasn't until Wednesday that I finally realized what the issue was. Again, this was many years ago, and this is not a mistake that would be made today, but it is a difference of at the time I probably would have been an intermediate DBA, and I'm well past that at this point. But that is what happens. You learn from these mistakes that you made. And it was just performance, and performance is important, but this was kind of an outage because there were queries timing out. That it was a big deal. So you just got to make sure that, when you're done with the tasks that you're doing, that everything has been completed. Yes. Just this one system, this one database got missed, switching it to async. Yeah. Because we had FCIs for HA, and then it was asynchronous database mirroring for DR. But in order to do that failover, you have to switch it over to synchronous commit so that you don't have any data loss.
Yep, and they've done that. I'm notorious, even after owning a consulting company, being a consultant for people. I'll admit it. I've done this a couple times. Actually, one of your clients, Mike, before you were their lead DBA. Doing some work like maybe reseeding replication or reseeding an availability group, and I don't want the log backups running while I'm doing it. So I disable the log backup job and fix my work. And then I go to bed, satisfied that I did the work. And then I wake up saying, why is the log so big in that database? Oh, because there's no log backups. Thankfully, we alert for that with our monitoring tool. So
that's a mistake that we've all made in the past. It's not a mistake I make anymore because I just don't disable log,
your approach
log backups. There's a store procedure you can run that allow you to just get all those log backups restored that have occurred. The backups that have ran, get them restored. SB database restore. Or restore gene. There's plenty of other store procs out there that do this work. There's no reason in this day and age that you need to disable that log backup job. You may need to run it a couple of times, the store procs, to get it in sync, because while it's getting caught up, another log backup may have been completed. But because I've made that mistake so many times, and I'm just happy that there's a store proc that I can run that allowed me not to have to disable that job anymore.
Yeah.
And if I do disable it, let's say I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to add it to my calendar for 2 hours from now to disable it or enable it.
That's why the best part of being a founder and CEO is hiring people who are better at these things than you.
I think it's more. I think it's really important as a consultant to not make those kind of mistakes.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're a full-time employee, certainly your job is on the line.
Yeah.
If you make a mistake like that, but the reality is you're likely not to get fired as a result of an issue like that. As a consulting company, though, like your client may decide that we're done with this consulting company,
or they call the insurance company, or that doesn't happen with us. Thankfully. It was a minor thing here. So
I'm more cautious as a consultant than I am as a FTE.
Yeah, you have to be.
Yeah.
Maybe we can have like July be consulting month. We talk about consulting, the things I've learned in consulting, and you've all learned, and things I've learned kind of running a consultancy, because there's a lot.
You'll remember when we had a client who was telling me to truncate this, 2 terabyte table. And I'm like, remember. I won't be doing that. And he's the CEO telling me to hit F5 on that command. I'm like, nope.
Yes, it was.
I did do it.
Our customer CEO and straight pass CEO. And I said, Tara, just do it. It's fine. And she said, all right, but you told me to.
It was definitely scary.
Yeah. And that's, as another blog post a long time ago, it called, a paranoid control freak. Have I got a job for you? And in order to be a DBA, you have to be a paranoid control freak. And
especially as you get to the senior level, I realize that, you don't want juniors and intermediates to be making mistakes, but honestly, I mean, I'm not kidding. A lot of my knowledge is from mistakes, or some kind of production issue. And then you're learning as you're going. And, we have people that are non-seniors at our company. We don't want them making mistakes, but that is where a lot of us learned. And you're learning on the fly at times. And you become a better person.
Mark Twain's got a quote very similar to that. It goes something like, good decisions come from experiences. Experience comes from making bad decisions.
Yeah,
exactly.
A little bit like that, right? It's like,
that is a paradox of being consultants. Yep. Because you don't have runway for mistakes.
I have this a blog post out there that talks about my big mistakes in production. And the one big mistake that's related to our discussion here, because it pertains to log shipping. So at that company where I did, and I can mention the company because it's not a client. I worked for Qualcomm for 12 years, and we did disaster recovery failovers twice a year. And, after that testing is done, you have to set up log shipping in the other direction. So, as part of that, you are, grabbing your full backups, restoring them. Well, I restored over the new data, the Las Vegas DR. It's typically a DR site, but now it's primary. And just so used to the Las Vegas site being the disaster recovery server that I overwrote the production database. And unfortunately, that system did not have a lot of activity. So that, normally if you have a system where you are about to make a mistake, and you're going to restore over a production database, usually there's connections that'll prevent you from doing that restore. And, thank goodness for that usually. But unfortunately, this was a system that did not have any connections when I went to do the restore. So it ended up not being a huge deal, but this is this is something that you learn from. And if I'm doing a restore in production or dropping a database in production, you can bet I'm spending probably a minute staring at the screen, double checking I'm on the right server, checking my connection, maybe even doing select add at server name. I am like triple, 100 times checking. I am going to do the right thing here. A lot of our systems, we have access to, prod and test through the same management studio window, or app at least, and so you could make a big mistake like that. So Absolutely. If you think you're in a test environment, dropping a database, spend a little bit extra time to check.
Yeah. If you watch that video I shared, I admit to my very early career days before as a DBA of working at the night audit guy at a hotel that I used to be a grill chef and dishwasher at, and I had the keys to the walk-in refrigerator, and you don't get your included meal overnight because everything's shut down. But if you know your way around the walk-in refrigerator, you can get whatever you want. But you never want to lock the padlock in the walk-in refrigerator with the keys inside the walk-in refrigerator. So I now will never lock a door unless I see the keys, look away, see the keys, look away, see the keys, and then lock the padlock, because now I know I have my keys. And I'll hold my key while locking it just to remind myself it's there, because that was an awkward conversation the next morning, asking somebody to let me into the walk-in refrigerator so I get the keys back. Why was it in there? Anyway, yeah, so thank you all for coming. We will go into our office hours in Q&A time now, and stop the recording. If you have any questions, SQL Server related, anything at all, even consulting related, if you want to hear about more mistakes, or if you're one of our clients and you feel horrible about the mistakes we just admitted to, then you can also ask questions in that. And we'll stop the recording now. Thank you all. Thanks for the panelists for being here, and we will see what folks have to ask.